I've had enough. I don't want to go on. Why are we going through all of this? We can end it now. We can end it today.
I can't swim very well. Somebody would have drowned trying to rescue me.
You realise just how tiny that little boat is and how vulnerable they are.
We had a plan. We'd make this voyage to the north, but we would not eat each other if it went wrong.
He sent all the flares up except for 3, and the ship never saw us. Sailed straight past us, from one horizon to the other.
My name's Douglas Robertson. I'm the eldest son of the family Robertson. This is my dad, my mum, my sister, myself, and the 2 twins. My dad was a sea captain, my mum was a special fevers nurse in Hong Kong. And for some reason, they decided to give that life up and start a farming life in the middle of England. We didn't have telephone, we didn't have television. We lived in an isolated community, so we weren't really with it.
We had no electronic devices, so our playtime was our imagination. One day, it was a Sunday morning, we were all sitting around in Mum's bed, listening to the World News Service and about people sailing around the world single-handedly. My twin brother said something like, well, Dad's a sailor, why can't we do that?
Kids should be careful what they say in front of their parents, because Dougal suddenly grabbed this idea. I refer to my dad as my dad, and I refer to him as Dougal, because I'm still a little bit mad at him. It became apparent that it was really his idea, and for him, that he wanted to sail around the world and take his family with him.
Dad announced that he was selling up the farm and he was going to buy a yacht and sail around the world. Oh, all right. Dad says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And eventually, my mum found the Lucette, small little advert, World Gurgle or something like that.
She's a 43-foot-long schooner. She's got 6 berths in her. That's one for everybody. She's 2-masted, so if we lose a mast, we've still got the other mast that we can sail with for emergency purposes.
My dad looked at that. He went out to Malta with Anne, my sister.
We flew out. That was the first time I'd ever flown. We flew out to Malta and sailed her back. But we had a very eventful trip through very big storms on the way through the Bay of Biscay when the boat was knocked down. We were hit by a 70-foot wave, which was bigger than the mast. You learn from an experience like that how small you are. You learn what your place is in the world. I always had the morning watch, so it was 4 till 8. So I always got the sunrise. I did see some very beautiful things.
We sold the farm for £8,250, and we bought the Lucette for about £3,000. So we had some capital left, and we were able to fix up the Lucette ready for the round-the-world voyage. We didn't even sail around the bay for a practice sail. We had no training whatsoever, no steering training, no sail handling training. Dougal said, you'll learn on the job.
Nobody knew what jobs to have and to do. Instead of having 70 acres to roam around in, you just had 40-odd feet. I don't think they knew what to expect.
Now, I don't think that was a very good plan, and a lot of other people didn't think it was a very good plan, but that was Dougal's way. This is one of the reasons why I call him Dougal. We set sail on a blustery day. I still hadn't taken the helm. Even at that time, I had not taken the helm of this boat. Dougal was caught, stamping his feet on the deck, shouting, "Yee-haw!"
And off we went. Picked the anchor up, and off we went.
He had a plan to Lisbon and to Canary Islands. That's as far as it went. And then, obviously, it was across the Atlantic, but to where we didn't know.
The night that we went was horrible. It was raining, and as soon as we left the shelter of the harbour, waves were coming over and hitting you in the face. And when you hit by an angry sea, it tastes different. It tastes briny and bitter.
Dougal said, "Douglas, come and take the wheel." I mean, this is a skilled, experienced helmsman was needed for this, you know, not a first tripper. And so my sort of baptism of fire started and learning how to sail.
And I just remember this green water smashing over the front of Lucette. I thought, he never told us about this. He never said that this was going to happen. And the further we got out to sea, the worse the weather got.
I remember my mother saying to my dad, "Dougal, can we send up the rockets?" And Dougal turned to her and said, "Don't be silly, woman. Only a fool would be out in weather like this." And my mum said, "Exactly."
We'd never been to London. We'd never been to any major cities in England. Falmouth was the biggest town we'd been to. And from there, we went to Lisbon to dry out, which was a beautiful city.
I remember walking along the harbour area, the smells and the food and the people that we met.
We had succumbed to the life of adventure, you know, the thoughts of going home, and we'd gone. And little did we know, only looking back, that it was only preparing us for the main event, which was to come in the Pacific Ocean a year later, you know. But we sailed across the Atlantic.
Now, that was the most beautiful journey ever. Beautiful ocean, beautiful seas, calm weather, fish, flying fish. Everything that we read about, we were beginning to see in the ocean. We actually went swimming in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The boat was that calm. Dad said, "You can have a swim if you like." I would never do it now. It's just crazy.
We had a great time, and this was what it was supposed to be all about, you know, a life of controlled adventure.
Sailing along, maybe 33 miles in one day. Took us 33 days.
We eventually got to Nassau.
My father had helped a Bahamian fisherman, and he towed him back to Nassau.
There was a family there who were on holiday in one of the islands, and he wanted to give us a gift for saving one of their islanders.
They invited us to dinner, and that's when I met him.
A long story short, my sister Anne was to fall in love with his son. My mum and dad probably had no choice but to accept that Anne wanted to go.
Although I was torn, they just had to accept that I was over 18 and I was an adult.
It was pretty precarious, isn't it, leaving your daughter, your 18-year-old daughter, with somebody and not being able to get in touch with her. You know, I think back to that and think that was quite a risk, really. But we were determined to go on. We had set off on a trip around the world, and a trip around the world was what we were going to do. We then met this student called Robin, and he joined us in Panama on the basis that he would teach the children some mathematics and some English on our way across the Pacific Ocean. We sailed through the Panama Canal and onto the Galapagos Islands, which are very difficult to get to. A large whale tried to make love to the boat, and it was bigger than a 55-foot sea whale. It rubbed itself up against us on the port side and nothing doing, and sort of went underneath the boat and rubbed itself on the starboard side, nothing doing, and off it went. And we just thought that we might look like a whale from underneath the water. And the other thing was the rain. We sailed through the doldrums from heavy rain shower to heavy rain shower. But we had reason to remember those two events later on. We got to Galapagos. We spent 3 weeks cruising around the Galapagos Islands. We were seasoned seafarers by this time, and we had a 45-day voyage planned for the Marquesas. We set sail on the 13th of June.
Which my mother created Holy Mary Hall about. Dougal, you can't set sail on the 13th. And he goes, it's not Friday the 13th, it's Thursday the 13th.
So we decided to sail on the 13th of June, 1972. We were catching the trade winds across the Marquesas. It was on the 15th, 10 o'clock in the morning. Sandy was on watch. I went to the cockpit where Sandy was to see how he was getting on, and the fishing line was dancing in the water, and I pulled it in, and there was a big squid on the end of it. And I remember saying to Sandy, well, there's probably other fish around here. You know, if there's squid, there's other fish. And I think Sandy saw it too, as a sort of a black shape. This looked very solid. We knew it wasn't a bird, but we didn't know what it was, so black shapes over on the starboard bow.
All of a sudden, there is such a crash. Bang, 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 bang. And my cup of coffee is airborne. It's up here somewhere like this.
It bodily lifted the yacht out of the water. We didn't know what had happened. The splintering crash was so loud, it hurt our ears. Just the loudness of that noise just made me know that this wasn't going to end well.
Bang, bang, bang. I'm going, oh my God, I've ran aground. And I've turned around like that, looked in the water, and there, right there, was a female killer whale.
I poked my head down the hatch to see if Dougal was about, and he was there in the aft end of the boat with water around his ankles. I heard a big splashing, surging sound over my left-hand shoulder, and 3 killer whales appeared. Like a daddy, a baby, and a mummy one. The male was 30 foot long, big. His head was split open. Blood was pouring into the water. And I popped my head down the hatch again and said, there's whales, Dad, there's whales out here. But he was up to his knees in water already. And Dougal looked up at me and he said, where's this water coming from? And he pulled the floorboards up and there was blue water underneath. And he looked up and I think he was up to his waist in water by then. And he said, abandoned ship. He said, get the life raft over the side. And I went forward and started to take the sails down. Dougal had come up on deck by then and said, what are you doing? Get the life raft over the side. It was only at that point that I accepted the fact that we were sinking and that this was for real.
People were shouting, are we sinking, are we sinking? Get Neil, get Robin. They were down below when all this happened. So they had to get out through the water, up the ladders. I just remember Mum trying to put this life jacket on us. And bear in mind, we'd never practiced anything like this. And the water's coming over the bow now, washing everything down the deck. Dad just gave me these bag of onions. He says, hold on to them, don't let go of them. And I just stepped off the yacht, straight into the ocean.
I put the dinghy over the side, I put the oars in the dinghy. I got the life raft launched. I was hauling the rope in. You know, you tug the rope to inflate it. I thought, this will never work. Yanked it. It started to inflate. The next second, I was washed off the deck and found myself in the sea. I knew the killer whales were around. I was expected to feel their teeth at any moment.
I turned over in my back, swimming with these bag of onions on my stomach. I've looked across at Mum, and Mum's still on the boat. And I'm saying, come on, Mum. Then she just swam straight through the rails into the ocean.
The life raft was still tied to the Lucette as she was sinking. So the rail broke, which now released the raft, but my dad had tied the sunken dinghy to it. So it had still held it in place and gave us all time to swim to board the raft. I hauled myself in and I could see the family sitting there. Everybody was there. Robin, my mum and my dad and the twins, they were sobbing. Everybody was yellow in colour.
Crawled to the back of the life raft, opened the flaps up just to see the masthead of Lucette just sail under the water like that. Gone. And that was such a tragic moment for me.
I remember the twins crying, sobbing with my mum's arms. My mum had her arms around them, and she said, "Don't be frightened." And they said, "We're not frightened, Mum. We're crying because we've lost Lucette."
Lost our home, lost our adventure. Everything's gone.
I think they attacked us believing we were a whale and believing we were food. And why not? I mean, we'd had the sea whale try to make love to the boat, and now we'd been hit by these killer whales, and one of them had split its head open. They don't do these things by accident. That had been an attack, a full-blooded attack. It says it's a 10-man raft, but really it holds 6 people, certainly not designed to hold people for more than a few hours. Of course, we had had no chance to send out an SOS because the radio, back in those days, we didn't have transistor radios. My mum spoke openly to my dad and said, "Dougal, we need to know if we're going to live or die. We want you to be honest." Dougal decided that he owed us the truth.
Survival stories on TV are glamorized. The reality is that when you're in a survival situation, the chances are you don't know when it's going to end. That really alters the way that you view the situation and the way that you behave. With the Robertsons, because they knew that nobody knew where they were, and they knew how remote they were, they knew that they weren't near any immediate shipping lanes, and the chances of being found in that area were very slim. They evidently went into survival mode right away.
Mum was having a go, saying, "Dougal, you know, what we're going to do, what we're going to do." And I think he made a pact with my mum. He says, "If it's the last thing I do, I'll get these boys to land." And Mum said, "Yes, Dougal, we must."
We went to England for a number of weeks, and I was waiting to hear from my parents before I moved on. This letter is the last letter I got from my mother. It's dated June the 5th. And she said, "By the time you get this letter, it'll be too late to write to us because we will have already set off." And she said, "We crossed the equator in oilskins and woolies, have been washing and drying for 3 days. All our love and often think of you or dream about you. Take care of yourselves."
We sat down to review where we were again, you know, 18 tins of water. There's 6 of us on board here. We've got a box of fortified bread, a box of glucose tablets, and a jar of barley sugared sweets. How long's that gonna last us? Well, we thought maybe 10 days. Dougal agreed that the water was key. He also knew, because he was a mariner, the trade winds create a current going in the same direction as the trade winds blow. They call the trade winds because they blow constantly. And the old sailing ships used to use them to sail around the world with. But where the trade winds meet, the air rises, and these are called the doldrums. And it rains heavily in the doldrums. There's the source of water. Can we get to the doldrums? Where are the doldrums? From here? Well, I said, the doldrums is to the north. The wind is blowing us to the north. The current is taking us to the west. So we could strike a northwesterly course. Maybe we could get there in 10 days, and water is key. Suddenly, from telling us all we might die, we had a plan. And it was then that Dougal made some promises to us. We'd make this voyage to the north to try and get water, but we would not eat each other if it went wrong. The next day, the night had come, so this was our I think this was our second night in the raft. The raft had started to make water, it had started to leak. There were some bellows that came with it to keep it inflated. And we used to take turns with these bellows to keep the raft inflated. And the bellows broke, would you believe? So we had to blow the raft up by mouth. The next day, Dougal came up with this idea that with the sail that I'd rescued, we could rig the dinghy as a towboat and tow the raft. With a towboat towing it, it would go to the north. With the dinghy, we could reach the doldrums in 10 days. Well, we committed at that point. We were starting to get hungry. That night, when the dinghy was afloat, a flying fish jumped in, and we had our first bit of raw fish to eat.
Mum, being a colonial nurse, helped such a lot, because she knew, what parts of the fish you could eat or not eat, or maybe not eat because you didn't know enough about it.
And we had some lemons and some onions that I think Sandy had carried them from the Lucette. So we made a sort of a lemon fish dish out of this flying fish, and we'd had something to eat.
We started to live off the sea as the survival rations and the life raft started to deteriorate and you'd be used up. We started to live off Mother Nature, basically, and what she could provide.
The days had started to tick by, and we were still alive, and we were sort of looking at each other saying, we're still alive. I remember a turtle came along, and I said, Dad, I'm going to catch this turtle. He says, no, Douglas, this is too dangerous. They've got sharp beaks and sharp claws, I said, look, Dad, I read in a book that you can eat these turtles. Another one came along a few hours later, and I picked it up and threw it into the raft, and Dougal cut its throat.
He's cutting the jugular vein and putting a beaker underneath it to let it pump the blood into the beaker and passing that round for everybody to drink. Right? If you were the first person, you had the best drink of your life. If you were the last one, you sat there with your 2 fingers in the beaker, mixing all the plasma and the clots of blood up, whisk it round really quickly and then drink it.
But we drank it anyway. It was like blancmange, drinking blancmange.
When he got rid of the turtle carcasses over the side at night, he'd slip them over the side very quietly and let them float off. Behind the life raft, you'd have an enormous explosion of water as the sharks attacked this dead turtle shell.
The American military use a generalized rule of 3s when they're training their soldiers in survival. What they talk about is 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. In that environment, it's exposure that is the biggest risk. Exposure to sunlight dehydrates you very, very quickly. They're also subject to hypothermia. Blood is drawn out from the extremities and rushes into the core to protect. It also comes from your brain, which then starts affecting cognitive function and your ability to make decisions and result in coma and death quite quickly.
We were in the raft, so we were shielded from the wind. We did have clothes, obviously, when we abandoned ship. But those clothes were causing us to break out in boils, literally hundreds of boils all over us. And we found out the way to get rid of them was to take our clothes off. So we were naked in the raft.
You get the little fish hiding under the life raft, which then be attacked by bigger fish. And you're just sitting there, and there's such a thump in your backside.
They'd hurt us. I mean, they would just bang underneath. It's like you're getting hit with something.
The fabric was wearing together and creating holes.
The water started to get more and more each day, because as the holes expanded in the bottom, the fish had bitten in. The raft began to deflate.
It was becoming a chore to survive in it. All your time was taken up blowing the thing up because it started to leak. The life raft itself was disintegrating underneath us. So we'd spend half the day up to our chest in water. You'd nod off like that and your head would just bounce in the water.
And there was one dry spot on the raft, the central thwart, where we took it in turns to lie on this dry area so that we could have a bit of dry, maybe get some sleep. And then you'd get back into the water, the cold water. At night, it was cold.
And then to be my turn to go and sit on the dry thwart to dry out. And your skin would be all peeling off your fingers.
The sixth day came, and then about 11 o'clock in the morning, a ship came by. A ship, I shouted. Look, there's a ship. I thought, this is it, it's over. We are going to be rescued.
Dad, being a nautical man, knew that there's somebody supposed to be on watch on that ship. He sent all the flares up except for 3.
I blew on the whistle. Blew and blew as loud as I could. And Dougal shouts, see us, you see us.
And the ship never saw us, sailed straight past us, from one horizon to the other.
It affected us all very badly. Dougal came back on board the raft and he said, look, we stand more of a chance of being run down by a ship than picked up. He says, we can't rely on rescue to get out of this. He says, it's down to us. We have got to sail from here to America. 75 days. I said, Dad, you can't be serious. We can't survive 75 days in this. He says, we're going to have to. We would have to say every day, what's the password for today?
And it was survival, not rescue. And he would ask us that every day. It was their way of instilling positivity into us, to stay alive.
If we can stay alive for 75 days, we will get out of this. We suffered in that raft for another week and a half, in the water up to our chests, and we were discussing abandoning the raft and saying how dangerous that would be. At least we had cover from the sun and the rain, and we were discussing about making it go another day when the floor fell out of the raft. And so now we had no choice. We had no choice. We had to abandon the raft and take to the dinghy.
He decided that he'd chop the life raft up into bits, wrap it round the dinghy, and then we'd all transfer in.
And we did it. We did it. We managed to transfer. It was quite precarious. When we got into the dinghy, it was dry. And it was such a boon. And we could actually steer the dinghy. We could steer it in the direction we wanted it to go. And it was going much faster now that the raft wasn't sort of holding it back. So there were some benefits, but the best of all was it was dry. I remember one night waking my dad up because we could sleep in the dinghy. And I said, Dad, look on the northern horizon. I said, it's the North Star. I can actually see the North Star. That means we must be 5 degrees north. We've sailed 500 miles. The doldrums must be just ahead of us. And I remember Dougal saying, a change in the wind means a change in the weather. And I said to him, Dad, does that mean it's going to rain tonight? Because we had precious little water left. He says, I'm not a prophet, Douglas. And I thought, well, I thought you were a prophet, you know? I mean, how can you say this now? The next night after that, it rained like you wouldn't believe. Huge thunderstorms and the typical weather of the doldrums, you know. We were so happy. We cried with joy. We'd be able to fill up with water. And the first stage of our voyage, a remarkable voyage, was over, and it had been successful. And we had picked up the rain from the doldrums and replenished our supplies.
There's a moment in one of the storms where I thought, this is it, we're done. It was coming down so hard that the sea was alive. It was boiling, the sea was. And we'd get lightning strikes, fork lightning coming out of the clouds, striking the ocean. And then the whole area was lit up daylight. It was just like a boiling cauldron. But, you know, my dad sat and watched that night, all through that night, a baggy pair of shorts. And he sat on the centre thwart. And he wouldn't give that position up to any of us because it was the coldest point on that boat.
Life changed in the dinghy. We were catching turtles regularly. We were catching rainwater from the doldrums, and we bailed that dinghy out, non-stop bailing to keep the sea out. We sang to try and stay warm. We played games, Desert Island Discs being a favourite, and Robin, God bless him, was the radio, so we could switch him on and switch him off, and he would have to sing whatever music was selected, even if he knew it or not. It didn't matter. Slowly, day by day, we ticked off another 25 miles, another 25 miles. On the 25th day, by a freak accident with a turtle, we lost all our water. And we thought, my God, I can't believe that we've come to this. After we were doing so well, we were very depressed after that. We went very thirsty. I remember going for about 4 or 5 days with no water. One sip, I would not allow myself more. And there wasn't more anyway. I remember saying to my dad, you know, I've had enough, Dad. I've had enough. He says, what do you mean? I said, I've had enough. I don't want to go on. I said, we're not going to survive anyway, you know. Why are we going through all of this? We can end it now. We can end it today. And he said to me, Douglas, do not let your bright light go out. We need you to help us get home. Do not give up. And he said to me in a rare, rare moment that he loved me.
The Robertsons were in a tiny little dinghy. Being unable to stretch out for the fear of capsizing the boat would have been incredibly difficult. It's almost impossible to prevent muscle atrophy in those scenarios. Dehydration is a big killer in wilderness survival scenarios. The organs can start shutting down as well, and then once the organs start shutting down, we're in a whole world of difficulty, particularly being that remote.
Life became life. There's no talk of death. There's no talk of anything like that. It became life. It became like I was saying, an ecosystem around the dinghy now. We're talking about how we can take on fluids and things like this. My mother decided, well, we could have an enema out of all this water and brackish stuff in the bottom of the boat. Of course, as a young kid, I didn't know what an enema was. What's it? Dad, what's an enema? So basically, what's going to happen is this. You're going to bend over the middle thwart. We're going to put some turtle oil on this rubber hose. He'd sharpened it to a point. Your mum's going to push that into your rectum, and she's going to fill it full of all this stuff on the bottom of the boat. And what that'll do, your body will take out the goodness out of it, and then the rest you'll pass the rest. All right, fair enough. We were catching fish, we were catching turtles, we were drying fish. We learnt to eat food in so many different ways. Neil used to chew us very slowly. I'd eat mine as quick as I could, right? Because then I'd spend the next hour regurgitating it and eating it again. Regurgitate it, eat it again, regurgitate it, until I couldn't get any more out of my stomach. Fish's eyes, for example. You could bite the membrane and squirt the fluid in your mouth. The sensation of fluid going down your throat was absolutely fantastic.
Real survivors only talk about one thing, and that's how you know if they're real survivors, and that's food. All you talk about is food, and it never loses its resonance and its vitality. And we were hungry. We had this cafe, and we were going to open it up. And when we got back home, and Dougal was, he says, you know, I think we might apply for a wine licence for this cafe, because not many cafes do wine. Sounds like a good idea. What about spirits as well? Well, the wine and spirits is two different. Oh, yes, OK, well, you know, there's a ship over there. And he carries on talking about the wine licence. And I said, Dad, did you say there's a ship over there? He said, yes. It's a ship. A ship. I said, a ship. A ship.
And then panic set in. Oh, my God. Remember the first one, it went past us. Mum was saying, don't worry. If it doesn't see us, it doesn't see us. We'll just keep on going.
I'm going to fire the flares. Dougal made that decision. Clear the decks. I'm going to stand on the thwart. Linda, get the flares ready. So we're now all in position. And they're maybe 3 miles away. That's not far. And Dougal strikes the first flare. Red, glows red. It's burning brightly. He's holding the flare.
It burnt his hand. I remember it burned his hand, and he threw it up in the air.
Get me another flare. Get me another flare. She's closer. She's closer. She'd altered course. She's altered course 20 degrees. And we watched with bated breath. The next thing, she was there alongside us, stopped in the water. They were looking at us like a fragile nest of humans.
They saw us before we saw them, and they were saying, no way that people are living on that. No way. No, 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 it's not worth going to look at. Until the arc of flare went up in the air, and then they realised that there's people on board.
And I remember one of them saying, like, do you want to come on board? Of course we do. What, you think we're trying to prove the Kon-Tiki expedition or something? And they threw a heaving line across. Dirty, oily, black. I grabbed hold of it, held it in my hand, and I realised that this was not from our world. This was from another world. This belonged to a world that we wanted to go back to so desperately. But my dad, so he's weeping. He said, our ordeal is over. Our ordeal is over.
All the nets came down, all the hands came out, and Neil was first on the Tokamaru. Then I was second on, and I've stood there looking at Neil on the floor, going, why are you on the floor? You should be running around, yipping for joy. Till I went to put all my weight on my body, and I just fell on the floor. I couldn't walk. None of us could walk.
They went to sink the dinghy, and my dad said, no, no, please, save the dinghy. And they looked a little incredulously at Dougal and said, well, why do you want to save the dinghy? And he said, our food's in there. It's like we couldn't let go of our precious food that we'd worked so hard to harvest and save. The captain appeased my dad, you know, sort of hauled the dinghy on board.
They clothed us, they gave us food, they looked after us. First meal was a cup of black coffee and a piece of bread and butter. And it's still my favourite meal today.
We were staying with my cousin. My cousin came running out and she said, quick, come, there's a phone call for you. I think it's important. It was someone who identified themselves as being from Reuters and told me that my parents had been rescued and I should expect to see the story on the 6 o'clock news. I was both shocked and frightened and worried and all those things all at once. I can't swim very well. It's entirely possible that somebody would have drowned trying to rescue me. To lose somebody at the beginning of a trip like that would have been very demoralising. So I was thankful that I wasn't there. They were put on a ship home and they brought the dinghy with them, the Edna Mare, and the whole family hired a coach and we all got on the coach and drove to Liverpool to greet them.
Our family put us up. Our cousin shared her house with us, which was absolutely fantastic. Dad wrote his book and everything like that, and eventually my mum and dad bought a house. Life was going on, you know, and we were going to school, realising we had to learn something. Sat in high school, and I just thought, I wish I was in that life raft. Such a shock. Let me tell you, there's some fantastic days on that life raft. I mean, it might seem weird for me to say that. I always look back at those magical days.
You know, you're so elated to have survived another day. It's like living before we got civilised. You know, we worry about mortgages and cars and things like that now. But when it's your life on the line every day and you're successful, it gives a quality to your existence that I can't truly, properly describe.
You will no doubt read your father's log in good time, but ours was ever the more colourful version. Dougal insisted on leaving the Galapagos on June 13th, against my whim about the date. The weather was not good, is it ever? And on the 15th of June, on a broad reach wind, very uncomfortable and impossible to stay in bed, spent a sleepless night on our cabin floor, head in the doorway, and bilge water lapping around my hair. And it goes on to tell what happened to them. It's one of my greatest treasures, this letter.